Hello, I'm Grin, and welcome back to Washer Dry's Adventures in Click Clock Woods as we enter the summer season of this level. You know, it feels like it was only just last week when Click Clock Woods was in spring, and yet here we are arriving in summer. And how time flies, because as you've just seen, Eerie is now all grown up, or at least partly grown up, and is crying out for some caterpillars. Now, I know that in the previous episode I referred to the caterpillars multiple times as worms. I'm sorry for the mistake, but when it really comes down to it, caterpillars are basically just less streamlined worms anyway, so who really cares? Now, you might well wonder why I just jumped into that there snappy plant. Well, rather simply, it's because I wasn't sure if it would actually hurt me. As you well know, much of the dangerous terrain that I've run into throughout the Washer Dryer challenge hasn't really presented as much danger as it usually would, and it only just occurred to me that in the previous season, I don't think I ever at any point actually saw the snappy plant ever once snapping at me. And further, since the snappy plant doesn't snap at the bee, and the snappy plant doesn't damage the bee, I thought maybe, since the snappy plant is not snapping at the Washer Dryer, maybe the snappy plant won't damage it either. Unfortunately it does, but at least it's kind of cool that it doesn't snap at it. And clearly I've got too much to say and too little time, because while I was talking about the snappy plant, I missed the chance to mention that I got 1 and now 2 aerodynamically challenged worms, and also a Jinjo, and even broke the beaver's burrow blocking boulder. And if breaking a boulder hadn't impressed enough of you, I now summon through the use of black magic the Spirit of Autumn, which is somewhat fitting because it's now time to use my mastery of time in order to speed things up until another thing interesting happens. And I think few among us would disagree that in life, there are few more things exciting and ecstatic than going gardening. Ah yes, the great outdoors, picking weeds, pruning roses, and ground-pounding camels in order to water the flowers you planted in the previous season. Truly there aren't many more things better or more enjoyable than nature, and I'm just glad we have video games so we can be shown that. And also, speaking of nature, does anyone else find it weird that on this level there are these swarms of very little bees? I mean, we go into a beehive of either quite large bees or possibly wasps, and we ourselves earlier in the previous season also transform into a rather large bumblebee, which makes me wonder, are we a large bee or are these small bees, and are they in any way related? Further, where are the beehives of these far smaller bees? We know that the bees up above have their own community, and throughout previous levels and even in this level at some points, we do see the beehives that have these smaller bees that contain the health-giving honeycombs, but do they all belong to those beehives? Because there does seem to be just far too many bees for that to be the case. But while my long-winded letters to Rare asking about the bee situation seem to be going unanswered, let's speed things up until the next point of interest. And so after rather rapidly moving through a stop at the swamp and a drop in at good old Mumbo Jumbo who's taking a bit of a break, we return to the tree to climb some more and slow things down, because I really must comment just how strong these leaves seem to be. They are rather large, granted by tree standards, but I'm a washer-dryer machine and conceivably weigh a fairly large amount, and these leaves aren't even beginning to bow under my weight. And so while I, for the effort of my most recent climb, will be receiving a jiggy, I really do have to acknowledge that the tree, and most specifically its leaves, certainly did most of the hard work. But trees aren't sentient, except for the ones that are, looking at you, Trunker, and so even if they did deserve the reward more than I, they wouldn't have enjoyed it nearly as much, and so it's probably better that I got it. It's that whole for the greater good thing where if the greater good is my good, then I fully support it. But let's shuffle along once more, because we've got a lot of ground to cover and only so much to say. And by ground to cover, I don't mean ground at all as I'm travelling vertically up a tree, but regardless, much like most women with their hairstyles in the 60s, eventually, we found ourselves arriving at the beehive. This is somewhat a moment of truth moment, as in the previous video, I speculated that the jiggy that you get within the beehive may very well be one of the 3 that we don't actually get throughout Click Clock Wood. And it does rather unfortunately seem that that is indeed the case. As far as I remember, once you enter the room, the bees would talk some smack to you, then they would fly at you, then you would slaughter about as many bees as Anakin Skywalker would send people, and once they were all dead, you would receive the jiggy. But instead, it does seem what we've gotten is a whole lot of nothing. The jiggy remains under a transparent piece of honey, I suppose. I don't think that bees have glass technology, But whatever the case, it clearly appears, much like the Jiggy underneath Tumblr, to be entirely unattainable. And so let's fast forward ourselves once more until we find ourselves at the more developed but not yet completed treehouse, in which we have our next goal. Which, by the way, is a major occupational health and safety hazard, and I'm really surprised that the authorities have not been alerted. You can't build your building to be hanging off of the ground by several hundred feet, and not only not put in a floor, but don't put in a warning on the door that says, "Warning, there's no floor and it's a really far drop." I mean, it's just an accident waiting to happen, and I really don't even understand it, even from an architectural standpoint, because while I know that when you're building a house, often the floorboards are what go in last, well, it doesn't really make sense for a treehouse that was built on a platform. Well, it wasn't built on a platform, in fact. It forces me to ask two really important questions. Firstly, what exactly is holding up this structure? And secondly, surely would it not have been easier to build the platform and then build the structure on top of it? Otherwise, I don't really know how they've gone about building the walls and roof over top of what is barely even there. I, as you have seen, managed to get the Jiggy, but didn't make my return jump and instead fell through the floor, and while doing so, fell really quite far. So let's speed things up once more, because I'm just going to be climbing up the tree again, rehashing plenty of old ground. And as we fast forward, I will note that I definitely do plan to sue whoever's responsible for this. You might well argue, but Grim, surely you shouldn't be breaking into people's houses and stealing their gold, to which I say, hush you, I'll do what I want. And speaking of which, let's slow things down again, as we've now not only caught up to where we were, but surpassed it, and we are now at Numbnut's house, to which I'm about to break into. Last season when I robbed the squirrel, he had some blue eggs, which I actually needed, but this season all we had were some red feathers. I didn't actually need them, but I took them anyway, because I'm just that kind of person. I'm sure he'll learn a valuable lesson from this. What it is, I don't really know, but it doesn't affect me anyway, because no one's stolen my red feathers, so who really cares? And speaking of feathers, let's fast forward once more to visit our friend, the Deadly Eagle Airy. Unfortunately, it does seem that, much as I predicted in the previous episode, beating Airy may be the second of the three Jiggies that you're simply not able to get with the Washer Dryer Challenge when doing Click Clock Wood. And you may well be wondering, but what does this mean for Eerie? If Eerie the bird is not fed non-aerodynamically sound worms by the Washer Dryer, then what does the future hold for it? And rather unfortunately, I don't think the future holds a great deal for it. I definitely don't think Eerie's going to make it through winter, but what's even more of a tragedy is I don't think I'm going to be getting the Jiggy from it. And so with feeding Eerie having been the last thing of importance to attempt in Click Clock Wood summer season, this seems like a pretty good time to start to wrap up the episode. Which means as we fast forward to the exit, I've got little else to say other than, as always, thanks for watching, and until next time I have been and still am, Grim Grindle. If you would like to follow me on social media, a link to my Twitter is in the description below, and if you would like to join the Channel Grim and Grin Discord, the Echo Chamber, a link to that is also provided. Join us next week as the Washer Dryer's adventures in Click Clock Wood continues, and we tackle the autumn season.